I've analyzed more than 1,000 goals of classic video game football, from games barely resembling the sport and realistic simulations. Enjoy fantastic moves and completely ridiculous moments. Let's see from where on the pitch, by whom and how goals are scored.
He scores with a header.
This is the evolution of football video games, all of which happened in the 90s. What you are seeing here is a list of all football games from just one platform, the Amiga, which wasn't even relevant anymore in the late 90s. We will ignore pure manager games, but additionally there are completely different games on other systems, and even if it's just a conversion to another platform, the gameplay can be very different, sometimes with regional adaptations. In other words, this video cannot be complete. Almost all of the 80s will be ignored, as football games from this era were just too basic. Instead, we will look at about 20 of the most fun, interesting and popular games. And 5 of them are honored with a deep analysis, with lots of highlights. For the early two-dimensional games, I typically use graphical settings which are close to the original experience. For the 3D games, however, I usually show a higher resolution, which is much easier on the eyes. Furthermore, I sometimes break with chronological order, whenever I think it's appropriate. So, welcome to Quantified, and if you're enjoying this video, which is based on more than 60 hours of raw footage, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. So let's kick things off. It's 1990 and international football is dominated by players like Matthäus and Maradona. Nintendo has innovated the home console market with games like Super Mario Bros. And Tetris. In some countries, these games were available on a single cartridge bundle, together with Nintendo World Cup. With only 6 players per team, it's immediately obvious that this game is not intended to be a realistic simulation. The penalty box is way too small, and the 6-yard box is actually asymmetrical, with literally no distance from the lower post. You control a single player, which is quite overpowered, and without possession you can give instructions to your teammates in order to pass or shoot. There are several kinds of trick shots, like the bicycle kick or the diving header, but you do need to get the timing right. But first and foremost, this is really brutal football, with foul after foul. Where's the referee? Yes, you can literally knock out an entire team. And with so many unconscious players, we gotta move on. However, Nintendo World Cup will be remembered as the foundation for the even more frantic Kunio-kun no Nekketsu Soccer League, which was released in 1993. And believe it or not, there's a football game which can have even windier conditions, at least locally. But let's get back to Nintendo. In 1992, Super Soccer was released for the Super Nintendo. Utilizing the console's Mode 7, it creates some kind of flat pseudo 3D, just like in Super Mario Kart. While visually outdated, this allows for better representation of the verticality of football. Players have 3 attributes and there are star players which clearly stand out. And with such imbalance, it's a good strategy to just pick one of the superstar players and make a solo run, scoring an easy goal. Over. And over. And over again. In general, the game is way too deterministic, and you can reproduce unlikely scenes like this one. But football thrives from dynamic gameplay, and by the way, the penalty and 6-yard boxes have the wrong dimensions again. You can only pass the players which you see on the screen, which makes playing downwards awkward. While having fun moments, this game is not a great simulation at all, and is sent off. So let's go back a few years and look at what happened on other systems, such as the Amiga. This is Kickoff by Dino Dini. In 1989, Germany was still divided, but thankfully we can edit the team names. The game is using a relatively close bird's eye view, and the dimensions of the penalty box are actually accurate this time. A major difference to the other games is the lack of control over the ball, which is not attached to the player. However, this realistic dribbling, due to the fast pace of the game, requires a lot of practice and can feel very frustrating. And the game is very hard versus equal opponents. But thankfully, there's the Sunday League, which makes the opposing team much slower. Despite the simplistic, often frustrating controls, it can be considered the first somewhat successful attempt at simulating football in an action game. The successor Kickoff 2 was released in 1990. It's a refined version with many more game modes and options, even wind. The game speed can be adjusted, but 50% can feel a bit slow, something like 75% would have been nice. It's still very challenging, but you now have a bit more control over the ball. However, it's a rather marginal improvement, and neither a remarkably fun game nor a realistic simulation. Or have you ever seen someone converting his own cross? In 1992, Sensible Software released Sensible Soccer. However, in the following we will discuss only footage from Sensible World of Soccer 96-97, or let's just call it SWOS. It has basically the same core mechanics, but offers many more game modes and teams from the whole world. Despite utilizing just one button, the game controls quite well, allowing for nice passing sequences. And there's the aftertouch for changing the ball's trajectory, which applies to both shots and long balls, and both just require the button to be pressed for longer duration. But be careful, as you can shoot over the crossbar. Unlike the first two Kickoff games, the ball is basically attached to the player. However, you can still use it when quickly changing direction. There seems to be a reasonable compromise between the Kickoff series and a game like Striker, which makes even Messi look like a beginner. Partly because of this, crosses happen rather diagonally instead of closer to the goal line. Defensively, you can just try to run off the ball by quickly changing direction when being close to it. Or you can go for the risky sliding tackle. Instead of playing against a computer or another human opponent, you can just simulate a match or watch the AI playing against itself. By doing the latter, I recorded many international matches, resulting in 348 goals. But before analyzing, we need to talk about the dimensions of a football pitch. On both ends we have the goal line, which needs to be between 45 and 90 meters long, but the international standard is 68 meters. For all plots, including other games, I'm using 72 meters, and I actually measured the same value for SWOS. On the sides we have the touch lines, which have an international standard of 105 meters. And most games agree on this value, with the exception of SWOS though, where the pitch is actually of slightly illegal length, and the high game speed might be a reason for this. The numbers of pixels which I've measured for the size of the penalty box determine the shot locations and other measurements for each game. The goal in SWOS is actually more than a third wider than in real football. This might be intentional not just for visual reasons, but also to allow for a wider range of shot attempts. The penalty spot is exactly halfway between the goal area and the edge of the penalty box. And the goal, by the way, is supposed to be just for visual orientation, as each spot is meant to be from a perfect bird's eye view. Let's have a look at all the locations from which goals have been scored. Own goals and penalty kicks excluded. We can immediately see a lack of goals from sharp angles, and this is partly due to the adirectional and non-assisted control scheme. Furthermore, there are a lot of long-distance goals, with about half of all goals coming from outside of the penalty box. There are 5 goals which clearly stand out, so let's have a look. Directly after a throw-in from 37 meters. 39 meters. Same distance but a free kick. Then this amazing free kick from 43 meters. And finally a goal from 47 meters. Despite all of this, there's a decent amount of short distance goals. They typically happen to be second chance goals. The keepers probably don't like them. There were 6 own goals, and they can happen in a similar way. Goalkeepers can be surprisingly strong though, especially against shots from relatively close distance, sometimes displaying incredible reflexes. About 4% of all goals came from penalties. They clearly illustrate the limited possibilities in terms of shooting, as you only have 3 directional options. In general, there isn't much goal construction over the wings. It's often like a constant back and forth, with the ball traveling a lot of meters in a short period of time. This actually reminds me quite a bit of foosball, the popular table football game. While there are no walls in SWOS, both foosball and SWOS share the high game speed, as well as the high fraction of long distance goals. Another parallel are the quite static player positions. In the simulations, goals from corners always seem to happen in a similar way. There's a high ball close to the center of the goal, and the midfielder is converting. Over and over again. If a midfielder doesn't score directly after a corner or from long distance, it's typically in a rather complex situation. Here, the goalkeeper deflects the ball gets passed back, and the midfielder scores. And here you can see an almost identical pattern. In this scene, the midfielder takes advantage of bad defending. But the referee missed the foul. Only 14% of all goals came from midfielders, and not a single one by a defender. Own goals are mostly by defenders, but here midfielder is doing a rather dumb sliding tackle. The average goal distance was 16.4 meters. Headers can happen, but are quite rare in this game, at least in the simulations. If it's a goal, it's typically a quick second chance. In my simulations, just about 2% of all goals came from headers. This is a really low number, as in real football you typically have between 15 and 20%, or even slightly higher, especially in the 90s. But despite the lack of realism, due to the fast pace and the responsive controls, the game is still being played as of today, in the form of the fan-made SWOS 2020. It allows for online play, and there are players with thousands of matches. There are regular updates with real player names. And you can watch replays of the best goals, so let's have a look. Apparently, skilled human players are able to put together amazing sequences of headers. And they know how to utilize the sliding tackle offensively. This goal is equally spectacular. And here's a perfect SWOS cross. This cross is more likely to be seen in real football. These experts really have some incredible ball control. And believe it or not, the crossbar tries to control the ball as well. Headers can be converted from crazy distances. But they can't beat this. In 1993, Dino Dini wasn't done yet. He improved on his kickoff games, and many consider Goal the real Kickoff 3, which was a rather disappointing game, with some really weird animations. A zoomed out bird's eye view is now available, which makes the game more playable, as you can see more of what's going on. However, the ball is still quite difficult to control. A close perspective is available as well, and both vertical and horizontal versions of both zoom levels can be selected. A medium zoom level would have been a perfect compromise though. Besides the camera perspectives, there's a variety of other options, including difficulty settings on top of the general team speed levels. Similarly to SWOS, there are real player names, and players now have several attributes. The goal rate is even higher than in SWOS, especially on the fastest settings. There seems to be a decent variety of how goals are being scored. Here we even have a successful solo run by a defender. And here a defender scores in the free kick situation. Headers are rare, but who needs headers when low crosses can be equally successful? the aftertouch is still available and can help with sharp angles. While SWOS is still the best football game with a top-down perspective, Goal is a convincing improvement of the kickoff formula and seems to be somewhat realistic in simulation mode. Except for the early whistle, of course. While Dino Dini Soccer actually wasn't developed by Dino Dini himself, it was clearly inspired by Goal, at least in some aspects, such as the available cameras. Apparently snow has been added as a surface option, and passing is very accurate and fast, allowing for a nice game flow. However, there are many interruptions due to fouls, and the seemingly endless referee animation can't be skipped. Unlike all other games, a lot of goals come from penalties and free kicks. Unlike the actual games by Dino Dini, you tend to have way too much control over the ball, and the game tries to balance it out with superhuman goalkeepers. Overall, it's a game with great potential, but ultimately it comes short due to questionable design decisions. In 1993, it was time for the very first FIFA game, FIFA International Soccer, which tries to impress with good presentation. In contrast to the various vertical and horizontal perspectives we have seen so far, FIFA tries an isometric one. While essentially still being in 2D, the resulting visual impression is a bit more realistic and three-dimensional, also thanks to the decent animations. While the dimensions of the pitch are absolutely in line with international standards, the goal is slightly too wide, by about 14%. But does this perceived realism also show in the gameplay? In order to find out, I let the AI play against itself, resulting in 119 goals. In the options, I went for a mix of different field conditions, and for game type I did not select action, which would have led to way faster gameplay. Instead, I selected simulation, with fouls and offsides activated. While the goal rate is only about half of the fast-scoring SWOS, we have even more long-distance goals, with about 2/3 scored from outside of the penalty box. With respect to the positions, we have exactly the same distribution as in SWOS. However, the formations are a bit more forward-heavy on average. In comparison with Sensible World of Soccer, the longest distance goals are less separated from the rest. Let's have a look. 33 meters. Same distance but with much more impact. Wow. And the goalkeeper can't believe he didn't save a shot from 35 meters. But there are only straight shots. And no curved balls like in SWOS. There were no goals from penalties, but 2 successful free kicks. Very high accuracy from 29 meters. And maybe even more accurate from 28 meters. Corner kicks can be successful as well, but not in the way you would expect. Here shooting directly from long distance. Unlike real football, the penalty box isn't covered very well. Besides heavy shots from outside, the game likes to produce forceful flying headers. Here is an even more ridiculous one. His head must be shaky. And here's a very unlikely third chance goal after a lot of woodwork. This goal is very unlucky from the goalkeeper's perspective. Not just goals, also fouls can be displayed in a spectacular way. The offside rule can be activated, but its interpretation can be strange. The goalkeepers are not very smart but still difficult to overcome, especially from close distance. Here's a massive blunder though. By the way, this is the shortest distance goal in my sample. Unlike SWOS, we have goals from really sharp angles, even from long distance. Here's an example. Even more remarkable though is the extreme imbalance between the left and the right side of the pitch when it comes to extreme horizontal coordinates. There are at least 4 possible explanations. My goal location detection system might suffer from systematic errors, but the shot on the right, like many others, seems to be at exactly the correct spot. It could be a result of randomness, as even very unlikely outcomes can happen. There might be an imbalance in terms of the forwards on the left side dominating the defenders when comparing the situation on the right side. This would show on the skill values, of course. My favorite explanation though is that the game tries to initiate attacks, preferably over the left side, in order to make the game look more dynamic, as due to the perspective, shots from the left look way faster than shots from the right. This might be interesting for further investigation in the future, but I would want to use a different experimental setup and a higher sample size. Overall, FIFA is just a decent game, and a prime example of a first visual impression being misleading. By the way, there's actually a version for the Game Boy, and you can tell that the game engine cannot handle the graphics. There isn't even a penalty spot. And how on earth does the crossbar deflect the ball like this? While FIFA probably wanted to be a simulation, Head-On Soccer, also known as FIFA Soccer, did not even try. It was released in 1995 and features a similar isometric perspective. The focus is clearly on fast-paced action, with lots of tackles and spectacular shots. The game gets even crazier when playing on a rough surface. There are random bounces in various directions. But such randomness forces the players to improvise, and this can make the game more interesting. Similar to the penalty kick system, it adds another reaction-based skill component to the game. You may call it an element of luck though. And I wonder why the pitch reminds me so much of the Australian grasslands. So, while Head-On Soccer is probably not worth a serious analysis, it's relatively playable and might deserve an award for being the funniest football game of the 90s. About the same time, Konami in Osaka released the first iteration of a quite famous game series. It's time for
International Superstar Soccer!
Or let's just call it ISS. The menu music is absolutely phenomenal. And the color scheme is friendly as well. But let's go into the pitch and take advantage of the Super Nintendo controller. Like in all versions of ISS, there's both slow movement and, when holding a specific button, fast running. But it comes at the disadvantage of creating a temporary distance between the player and the ball. There are three kinds of tackles: the risk-free normal charge, the longer range sliding tackle, and the shoulder charge, which can be difficult to execute. For passes, you have the short and flat, and the high and long version, with the latter being pressure sensitive. Long balls as well as shots can be deflected or blocked. And there are special moves like the diving header, the heel lift, and the overhead kick, if you don't fail like me. If you haven't noticed already, there are many high balls, often leaving the screen, and the animations look appropriate, but headers have to be timed. And second chance goals happen quite frequently, sometimes directly after a header. But every time I play ISS, something feels off. It's the perspective, and I would like to call it pseudo-isometric. With the goals being illustrated like this, it doesn't make sense for the touchlines to be horizontal. They would need an angle, like in FIFA International Soccer. Or, if the camera was supposed to be perpendicular to the touchlines, goal and goal line on the left should look more like this. And like many games of this era, the referee can blow the whistle to full or halftime at ridiculous moments. So let's move on. Just about 1 year later, we have
International Superstar Soccer Deluxe!
This is a nice upgrade with better controls, which generally feel more fluid. However, the perspective hasn't changed. We have some special moves again. Here's a completed overhead kick, and the referee can potentially be tricked with flops.
Dirty play, ref!
Many of the actions are now briefly commentated.
Good charge! He shoots! Blocked shot.
The sound effects have improved, and so have the animations. Like its predecessor, players have a condition value, which can be random. But now there's a wider arsenal of tactical options, which can be activated in-game. Finally, let's have a look at some goals from simulation mode. With so many headers, it's no surprise that crosses are more crucial than in SWOS or other games. As you can see in these examples, second chance goals aren't a rarity. And here's a third chance goal. Blocked shots can play an important role, here leading to an unexpected solo run. And then this happened. But this is not the only scene where the eye is looking confused. While this is probably the best available football game in 1995, due to the weird camera, the questionable AI, and the extreme emphasis on headers, it would be a long stretch to call it an authentic simulation of the real thing. But why exactly is football so difficult to simulate? Let's go back a little and have a look at NHL 94, which is still considered a relatively realistic representation of the sport of ice hockey, and we are talking about a game from 1993. Hockey has at least 3 advantages over football when it comes to authentic simulations. Firstly, ignoring goalkeepers and goaltenders, there are only half as many players, which reduces the complexity significantly. Secondly, we witness mostly flat passes and shots, which is much easier to handle in a 2D engine. And thirdly, puck physics tend to be simpler in general, as footballs can have complex, often curved trajectories, whereas in hockey even high shots are basically straight lines. So, in order to simulate football authentically, what we really need is a 3D engine. This should really help with the physics. And finally, we should automatically get the perspectives right. It's 1996 and the Nintendo 64 is the most powerful hardware on the console market. Furthermore, its innovative controller comes with an analog stick, which allows for very precise controls. The Konami team in Osaka tried to utilize this potential for a football game, and the result was
International Superstar Soccer
64. Thanks to the 3D engine, we now have different camera options, and all of them are showing the pitch with the correct dimensions. With a set of predefined faces and lots of meaningful player attributes, players are finally treated as individuals in a proper way. And yes, I did edit all of the names. The N64 controller enables a lot more precision due to more buttons, and the analog stick, which allows for completely free movement. But please keep in mind that on original hardware the game looks more like this, with just 320 x 240 pixels, which is very harsh on the eyes. Offensively, we have the direct flat pass, which can go backwards, the long ball with an optional and quite realistic aftertouch. But what really enhances the experience is the introduction of the through ball. It's really satisfying and can be absolutely deadly. And there's even a separate button for the 1-2 passing sequence. Shooting feels powerful but not overpowered, also thanks to the goalkeepers. Usually you don't miss the goal by much, as shooting is partially directionally assisted, but being pressure sensitive and due to randomness and the attributes you can shoot over the crossbar. Defensively, again we have the normal charge,
Long in midfield. He's looking for the break.
the sliding tackle,
The sliding tackle. What an opportunity!
and the brutal shoulder charge.
England have endless stamina. The referee blows for the foul.
For the very first time in video game football, we have quite realistic looking physics.
Waiting for the cross. There's a Piper aerial domination. Oh, how lucky!
Deflections are an important element of the chaos of real football.
Yes, dispossessed. Bulgaria have endless stamina.
Look at how the goalkeeper changes the ball's direction. The variety is quite phenomenal. Here, Davor Sugar goes for his famous chip. But it's not against Peter Schmeichel.
A fantastic reflex save.
And occasionally, tricks can be used in a very silly way. Generally speaking, the animations look really impressive for its time. And this is even sillier behavior by the CPU, I guess. Apparently, players can get really banged up. And talking about questionable passing, also this can happen.
Forward. He's hit it first time. It's hit the bar. What the hell? He's put it in his own net.
Not just the gameplay, also the presentation is spectacular for its time.
It's a red card. We have a player substitution.
By simulating many matches between the Euro 96 nations, I generated 342 goals. But I varied the game level, which affects both offense and defense. And for the goalkeeper level, I used both 2 and 3. This also affects the goal rate, of course. This mistake, for instance, is more likely to happen at level 2. I'm using only settings which lead, on average, to realistic goal rates. But from the Euro 24, which started high scoring and ended up being low scoring, we know that conversions can take a while. The AI is operating very carefully in the penalty box, as this is the only penalty in my simulations.
Nice save.
And remarkably, I have not witnessed any direct free kick goals, only assisted ones.
There's a Piper aerial domination. Goal!
But look at what's happening from this corner.
It's heading for the goalie. Goal!
However, the resulting distribution for the goal locations looks quite realistic. The overlapping of some points and the grid-like structure are mostly caused by my detection system, which is essentially radar-based, limiting the resolution. The settings seem to have an effect primarily on the goal rate, with the goalkeeper level of 3 leading to about 1 more goal per minute in the settings, at game level 5. Also, a higher game level seems to boost the defensive capabilities more than the offensive ones. The percentage of goals from outside of the penalty box might be slightly higher for a lower goalkeeper level, but our samples are too small for a clear conclusion. And while now there's actually a lack of long distance goals, the dominance of the central part of the penalty box is very realistic. But how does all of this look on the pitch? Like in real football, there's a good balance between attacks over the wings and attempts through the middle. There are way more crosses than in SWOS or FIFA, so you have classic goals like this one. Or similarly, but with a second chance. Here's a nice scissor kick, but it can be without any aerial contact, or with a completely flat cross.
What can Germany make from this move? What a
Deflections can lead to a goal directly as well.
The Piper aerial domination. Oh, how lucky! The attack warrants a second look.
And here's some kind of solo run, where the AI isn't impressive either.
What an opportunity!
But here's a really smart and elegant play, utilizing the 1-2.
He's looking for the break. Man on, will he take a shot?
And here we have some kind of counter attack. And a very special goal.
He's going all the way. Just the keeper to beat. A cracking shot. Goal! Goal!
Look very closely. Yes, a real ghost goal. As shooting is both assisted and free, sharp angles like this are possible.
Will he cross it? What an opportunity!
Even sliding second chance shots can have sharp angles. Like in real football, goals by defenders happen mostly after corners. But usually from really short distance. Overall, 13.5% of all goals came from headers. In terms of the positions, forwards are still very dominant, having scored 87% of all goals. And now let's celebrate this truly revolutionary game with some of the best long distance goals. An absolute cracker from 17 meters.
He's gone right behind that!
23 meters. Same distance after a nice aftertouch. An absolute beauty from 27 meters.
Goal!
and from 21 meters with a very nice replay.
He's gone right behind that.
But yet again, the referee is paying way too much attention to his watch.
That's the end of the first half. The game remains tied.
It's 1998 and Brazil's Ronaldo is starting to dominate. And in the video game world of football we have
International Superstar Soccer 98.
In general, the game is very similar to ISS 64, but it tries to improve gameplay and presentation in various ways.
They're passing well.
There are better animations and more attention to detail. But it can look a bit awkward at times.
That's the first yellow card of the game.
Players can display amazing ball control
World class.
and such a high level of dribbling, even way before Messi.
A chance for a goal here. That's in.
Here's a great one too, not just once but twice.
That's a superb one too. It's in.
Now we can witness desperate flop attempts.
Chance here. Tight defensive play.
But the referees aren't easy to fool.
That's the first yellow card of the game.
Like its predecessor, where it's hidden under config, there are additional weather conditions, which do change the gameplay. While with rain, the ball accelerates. With snow, the ball is golden and can get stuck. And players can slip. Now we have a higher fraction of goals from spectacular shots, such as the volley, the flying header,
Surely it's in. Great header.
and the scissor kick.
Volley. Off the crossbar. Goal. A beautiful goal.
The goalkeepers seem to be even harder to beat, showing incredible ball-catching ability. And like in ISS 64, simulation mode hasn't produced any direct free-kick goals. While the defenders are basically able to make smart clearances. And blocked shots are not a rarity in this game.
Fantastic shot. Great header. He won't give it up. Surely this time.
The players sometimes really don't seem to know how to protect the goal.
Here, he should have passed it. He was trying to do too much. It's in! A beautiful goal!
And if you think this was comical, watch this.
The keeper comes forward. He scored!
And again I used simulation mode and produced 144 goals with goalkeeper level 3 and game level 5. In general, the distribution looks quite similar to ISS 64, but the center area of the penalty box is even more dominant, with the spread in both directions being smaller. There is a clear lack of successful long-distance shots, with only one coming from outside of the penalty box. So it's no surprise that the average distance is just 7.3 meters, whereas for ISS 64 we are 10 meters and for FIFA 19 meters. The longest distance goal was actually scored from inside of the penalty box.
Superb play! Goal! World class football!
That was 21 meters, and now let's see the shortest distance goal.
This is a chance. It hit the post. Goal!
24% of all goals came from headers, which actually isn't too unrealistic for the 90s. And apparently, headers can assist headers.
Great header. Goal! He scored with a header.
Crosses are quite dominant in the gameplay. There are various ways of how they can get converted. This one is from pretty much exactly the average goal location.
It's in! World class football!
But this one is rather unusual, with the goalkeeper not having his best day. Goals from midfielders have more than doubled, from 10 to 24%, and this is way more realistic. Also, defenders get their fair share of goals now, having increased their rate from 3 to 12%. But all of their goals come from dead ball situations. 9 goals from corners and 8 from free kick situations. So while the distribution of goal locations has not become more realistic, the controls feel more fluid, and the gameplay has become more interesting in a few aspects. But there was one more ISS game for the Nintendo 64. In Japan, ISS 2000 was released in 1999, so technically it still belongs to the 90s. Please keep in mind that the following footage is from human CPU interaction. There were no simulations. The game shines with refined controls, which feel much smoother and responsive. The pressure sensitivity of passing has increased. And the through ball, which is arguably the biggest revolution of the ISS series, feels even more satisfying.
Some great skill being shown there. This looks good, Chris.
Tackling situations are more interesting now with a wider range of outcomes.
Number 8. That's nicely played. Number 9.
Quite often, it's not immediately clear who will end up with the ball.
Number 6.
As you can see in the sequence, the ball can get deflected in basically all directions. It's almost like pinball. And teammates seem to try to help each other out. Once again, the diving header is a mighty offensive weapon. And even defensively, it can work with impossible angles. And if defenders are of no help, it's good to have Oliver Kahn in the goal.
He aimed one a goal. Good clearance.
Interesting and realistic situations with a more densely populated penalty box seem to be more likely now. This is a strong candidate for the most fun football game of the 90s.
Oh, what a shot! It's in! It's gone in! Oh, it's a beauty!
The controls are absolutely spot on and can lead to both classic yet satisfying goals and absolute beauties.
It's into the box. Great header. Yes, it's there!
So we might have a winner. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, there was another Konami development team, working on their own series of football games. It's the Goal Storm and ISS Pro series on the PlayStation, for which 4 games were released in the 90s. Let's find out who's on the throne of 90s football. Will Team Tokyo overtake Team Osaka?
Goal Storm!
Was released in 1995. But with blocky graphics, a low frame rate, mediocre controls, and very few options on the pitch, it's immediately obvious that it would take a lot of improvements to get to the level of ISS 64, which was released more than a year later though. So sorry guys, I'm not applauding yet. So let's move on with Goal Storm 97, also known as International Superstar Soccer Pro. In general, it's a huge improvement with a completely new game engine. You can tell that the series is trying to become a good simulation of the sport of football. Optionally, the camera can be higher and further away, supporting the build-up of plays. The animations and control options have clearly improved. The ambition of being a serious simulation is demonstrated by the goalkeepers, which are not as passive as in other games of its time. But they surely should have invested in better sound effects. ISS on the PlayStation has improved, but overall ISS 64 is clearly ahead. Next was ISS Pro 98. Looking at the menu options as well as the team presentations, it's pretty clear that Team Osaka and Team Tokyo must have influenced each other. The control schemes are indeed quite similar, and the through ball is efficient here as well, but there's actually an additional high version. And the animations look way more natural than in Goal Storm 97.
Who feeds the ball forward.
An area where the series might already be ahead is the decision making of the players. Here we have a very smart clearance, a precise header as a pass, 2 successful charges, and then Zidane remarkably notices that he's playing against 2 opponents and changes his plan in order to find a way better solution. And after some passing, Djorkaeff starts a successful solo run.
He's got power. He tries the shot.
Like in ISS on the N64, there can be rain. But it might just be a visual effect, I'm not sure. The sound effects are still of poor quality, but they are nice gimmicks like the Dutch brass section. This is the actual resolution of the original game, which might be even harder to tolerate than on the Nintendo 64. And by the way, England scored a goal here, not the USA. Compared to ISS 98, there's less focus on crosses and headers, but they can be successful of course. Like in real football and more frequently than in ISS 98, there can be chaotic scenes in the penalty box with lots of players fighting for the ball. While I personally slightly prefer ISS 98 also due to the better presentation, this game is a winner for sure. And then, at the end of the decade, we have
International Superstar Soccer Pro Evolution,
which was released at a time when the name Nadal was not closely associated with tennis yet, and apparently Pep Guardiola was still a player. ISS Pro Evolution features at least 3 very playable camera perspectives. There's the wide camera, the normal far camera, similar to the one in ISS Pro 98, and the TV camera, which we will use for all of our simulations. The controls feel very similar to its predecessor, and the 1-2 is part of it. In general, there aren't many goals from special moves, but here's the flying header. And like ISS on the N64, players can put the ball into the net by sliding into it. The referee can be fooled with flops.
that's got to be a foul. Yellow card. Oh, he's tripped him.
The commentary could be more enthusiastic, but at least the brass section is back.
He blocks the pass.
The presentation has been improved by adding new expressive animations. The goalkeepers can show strong skills and make smart decisions, just like a modern goalkeeper in real football would do. I'm impressed. But occasionally they have moments of insecurity. And this can happen in various ways. And like in real football, keepers do have their fair share of blunders. Defenders have the ability to make absolutely crucial clearances. They can even help out with a header on the goal line. Here's another impressive example. The improved physics lead to various kinds of deflections. Here's an interesting deflection angle. All of this can lead to very complex situations with unexpected goals, displaying the chaos of football, which makes it so interesting. Literally all angles are possible, nothing seems scripted. Headers are utilized as intelligent passes more often than in ISS 98. Players are even passing to themselves. That's really a next level trick. Here's another example after a very long ball and a defender not paying attention. The chip has gained some popularity as well. And another from a relatively sharp angle. Maybe we can still top this. No, but a great clearance. Once again I used simulation mode, this time resulting in 87 goals. Despite of all the realism on the pitch, there's a surprising lack of short distance goals, leading to an average distance of 15 meters. Instead of the central one, it's the far third of the penalty box which is dominating. Let's have a look at the longest distance goals. 25 meters. Same distance by the free kick. Then this very precise shot from 26 meters. A Apparently, some new forms of celebration have been added. Only beaten by a free kick from 30 meters. By the way, there were no penalties at all. There was one more free kick goal in my simulations. This is from 23 meters. Goals from crosses in normal play are not very dominant. 28% of all goals came from headers, which is very high, but this one should not have counted. No chip in the ball yet. Only 3 goals were scored by defenders, but like in ISS 98, about a quarter came from midfielders. There's a good variation of corner goals, in terms of both position and location. Here's a deflection leading to a midfielder making the shortest distance goal in our sample. A short corner followed by a cross and a defender's header. A pretty standard header by a forward. Then a defender's header from really far away. And finally, a long distance shot by a defender after the ball could not be cleared. In general, this game feels like a brilliant simulation with lots of assisted goals and unique situations. It's a nice mix of variety and reasonable player behavior. To spice it up, occasionally there are blunders like this blatant miss. In other words, pretty much the whole range of possible events and outcomes is used. Also, the tactical variety has increased as counter-attacks are more frequent now, with players finding smart solutions like this brilliant through ball. Here's another example of a smartly executed counter-attack. This time with a precise header to an open teammate, putting the goalkeeper in a desperate situation. Here's a similar pattern. And as we've learned already, you can just pass a header to yourself. And with such variety, this is basically a prototype version of PES, the series which will dominate the following decades besides FIFA. So, after a slow start, Team Tokyo has joined Team Osaka at the top of 90s football. You might wonder what happened to the FIFA series, which had a respectable but not fully convincing start. There were yearly versions on different systems. Here we have a look at FIFA 99, which is not that much different from the 98 and 2000 iterations. Unfortunately, the simulation mode is kinda broken, as you have extended periods where basically nothing is happening, and the ball is not entering either penalty box. While this is not necessarily completely unrealistic, it's a golden rule of action football games to fake time in such a way that you can play entire matches in a significantly reduced time, and still have all elements of football represented in a somewhat realistic way, especially goal-scoring opportunities. Despite such long battles for the ball in simulation mode, it can be too easy to score goals as the ball is basically attached to the player, and both passes and shots tend to be super accurate. Except for some stiff animations, the presentation is pretty good though. The strong passing and shooting is partially balanced by superhuman goalkeepers. However, occasionally the game can create interesting goals like this one. But at this point in time, it's neither the best simulation, this title goes to ISS Pro Evolution, nor the most fun, fast-paced action football, which was probably accomplished by ISS 2000. But why did FIFA 99 get such favorable reviews back in the day? Especially on the PC, we see scores of about 90%. For many fans, it was convenient to have a wide arsenal of club teams and national squads, all of which came with real player names, and the presentation felt almost like on TV. And of course, it was much easier on the eyes to have at least 4 times as many pixels on the screen compared to the Nintendo 64 or the PlayStation. But most importantly, scores are also given based on what's available. The PC was the preferred platform for fans of 3D action games, as this genre benefits clearly from mouse and keyboard controls. And the same applies to strategy games, which even more rely on a decent resolution. Consoles, however, were strong for gamepad-controlled games, like platformers. and football games basically came from the same tradition. So, FIFA had a lot of catching up to do, and as we might see in future videos, it eventually will. And now it's time to wrap it all up. Feel free to use the comment section in order to share your own experiences with these classic games. The genre had a sloppy start with strange rules, repetitive gameplay, and wrong pitch dimensions. Kickoff 1 and 2 have a more solid foundation, but are hard to control. And actually not all that realistic either. But sensible World of Soccer gave us joyful, fast-paced action. And it's still relevant in the form of SWOS 2020. With Goal, Dino Dini improved on his kickoff formula. The first FIFA had decent presentation and an isometric perspective. A new superstar arrived in the form of ISS. The deluxe version might be the best game of the 2D era. But it was ISS 64 which opened a whole new world. A true revolution with good physics and a mighty through ball. While the Goal Storm series had its flaws, and FIFA got a bit stuck with his gameplay. ISS was further improved in 1998. And even more with a very fluid ISS 2000. Team Tokyo has improved a lot as well, displaying incredibly smart player behavior. ISS Pro Evolution is basically a Protopass, with lots of brilliant chaos and realistic scenes. Thanks for watching, until next time.